Greetings and bienvenue, Midnight Crew. Thank you for returning to this broadcast. And welcome to new viewers joining us for the first time. If you like a video, then feel free to subscribe.
The Yukon Monster. The Arctic wastelands of the Yukon Territory, on the borders of Canada and Alaska, are surely the last place anyone might expect to meet a dinosaur, which is why the following case merits a prominent place among the dubitanda of cryptozoology. The extraordinary tale of the beast from Partridge Creek debuted on the 15th of April, 1908, within the pages of a French journal called Je sais tout, I Know All, and was recounted by one of the creature's eyewitnesses, French traveler Georges Dupuy. According to Dupuy, the adventure had begun one day in 1903, when a banker from San Francisco called James Lewis Butler and a local gold prospector named Tom Leemore were hunting 3 large moose amid the marshy tundra countryside near the Yukon's Clear Creek, about 100 miles east of Dawson City. Suddenly, one of these burly deer raised its head as if it had heard something unexpected in the vicinity, and just as it did so, a second member of the trio emitted a loud bellow of alarm, sending all 3 of them fleeing southwards with all speed. Standing 7 feet at the shoulder and weighing up to half a ton, as the world's largest living species of deer, the moose is not a creature to be readily intimidated by anything, which is why the 2 hunters were so surprised by their quarry's impromptu flight. When they reached the spot from where the moose had fled, however, the reason for these creatures' uncharacteristic behavior became clear. There in the snow was the clear impression of an enormous body belonging to some unidentifiable beast of monstrous proportions. The beast's belly had plowed into the riverbed's swampy mud a massive furrow 30 feet long, 12 feet wide, and 2 feet deep, which was flanked by gigantic footprints measuring 2.5 feet across and 5 feet in length, each also yielding impressions of sharp, 1-foot-long claws. Completing the clues left behind by this unseen Goliath was the imprint of a mighty 10-feet-long tail spanning 16 in across its middle. The prints led several miles to a gulch known as Partridge Creek, where the track simply came to an end, giving the men cause to speculate that it must have leapt directly up into the gulch's encompassing cliffs. Following this, they made their way by canoe along the McQuestion River to the nearby outpost of Armstrong Creek, an Indian village where Butler had earlier arranged to meet Dupuy to take him hunting, and which was home to the Reverend Father Pierre Lavagnou, a French-Canadian Jesuit priest. When Dupuy and the priest heard about the monster, they were highly skeptical at first, but eventually Butler persuaded them to return to Partridge Creek with Leemore and himself in a second search for it, aided by some local Indians. After a day's intensive but fruitless search of the immediate area, and some distance beyond it in all directions, however, the party of weary beast hunters had resigned themselves to failure and decided to establish camp at the top of a rocky ravine. Thoughts of confronting monsters had been largely suppressed by the more practical goal of preparing a warm meal, until, wholly without warning, they received a terrifying reminder of the reason for their presence there. A hideous roar broke the Arctic stillness, and as the startled hunters reached for their rifles, one of them pointed with shaking hand to the opposite side of the ravine, where the crimson rays of the dying sun revealed a heart-stopping sight. A veritable monster in every sense of the word was clambering up its slope. Black in color, at least 50 feet long, and estimated by Butler to weigh about 40 tons, their horrific visitor continued to climb upwards for a time, mercifully unaware of its terrified human eyewitnesses' close proximity. When it was about 200 paces away, it paused for 10 minutes or so, furnishing them with ample opportunity to observe it at close range in all its spine-chilling glory. Although profusely splattered with thick mud, its hide could be seen to bear many coarse gray-black bristles like those of a wild boar, and a hideous mass of blood and saliva oozed from its cavernous jaws. Most remarkable of all, however, was the rhino-like horn perched prominently, if somewhat incongruously, near the end of its snout. As they continued to watch, the beast suddenly reared up onto its massive hind legs like a hellish kangaroo, gave voice to an ear-splitting roar again, and then disappeared back down into the ravine via a single immense bound. Not too surprisingly, the beast hunters found that the thrill of pursuing this creature had lost its former charm, and the following morning they journeyed back to Armstrong Creek. Dupuis later attempted to interest the Canadian governor at Dawson City in supplying them with a large-scale hunting party of mules and 50 armed men, but when this failed, he returned home to France. The matter was not quite over, however, for in January 1908 he received a letter from Father Lavenu, dated Christmas Day 1907, in which the priest informed him that on Christmas Eve and while in the company of 10 Indians, he had seen their monstrous quarry once again, this time racing at speed over the creek's frozen river, with what seemed to be the carcass of a caribou clamped between its great jaws. Tracks identical to those found back in 1903 were clearly visible in the deep mud and were followed by Lavenu and company for at least 2 miles before being obliterated by falling snow.
The Green Claw of Ohio River. On August 21, 1955, Mrs. Darwin Johnson had a terrifying encounter with what she claimed was a hideous creature beneath the surface of the Ohio River near Evansville, Indiana. While enjoying a leisurely swim with a friend, one Mrs. Chris Lamble, Mrs. Johnson claims that she was suddenly clutched around the knee by a large, hairy, claw-like hand. Only 15 feet from shore, Mrs. Johnson struggled to disengage herself and head for safety. Mrs. Lamble could only stare in horror as her distraught friend was yanked beneath the surface of the river. Miraculously, Mrs. Johnson managed to kick her leg free, but almost instantly she was seized again, this time from behind. Mrs. Lamble's shrieks echoed down the shoreline as she helplessly watched her friend being pulled below the river's murky surface once again. After resurfacing a second time, Mrs. Johnson lunged for Mrs. Lamble's inner tube, and the splash of her impact apparently scared her beastly assailant away. Once back on shore, Mrs. Johnson was treated for multiple contusions on her leg, at which point it was discovered that she bore a green, palm print-shaped stain. The stain could not be removed for several days.
From the 1890s to the 1930s, reports came out of northern Maine to the east, west, and north of Bangor, describing a large moose upwards of 2,500 pounds in weight, 10-foot antler spreads, and 15 feet in height, a true monster of the Northwoods. When coupled with its claimed height, the coloration description of dusky white denotes this moose as a true oddity, the abominable moose of Maine. In 1889, a large moose was killed near Ashland, Maine. This specimen was reported to be 1,600 pounds in weight, with a 6-foot antler spread, a true giant by any comparison, and impressive even if mismeasured by a factor of 2. In Washington County, Maine, in January 1900, a snow-white moose was reported in the Bangor Daily Whig and Courier. But the origin for the legend of the Spectre Moose comes from Lobster Lake in 1891. There, a guide, Clarence Duffy, reported the brute. However, according to later accounts, 2 brothers actually first reported the animal, Joe and Charlie Francis. The Francis brothers came across the animal, described as being 15 feet at the shoulders and 10 feet across the antlers. The brothers even reportedly shot at the animal, but missed. Known for their marksmanship, the brothers fled the area and did not return, superstitious of the encounter. John Ross also saw the animal a few months later, in the same vicinity as Mr. Duffy and the Francis brothers. In 1892, Howard Van Ness from New York City ran across the large beast some 30 miles northeast of Norcross, Maine. After being separated from his party, Mr. Ness reportedly came across an animal weighing nearly a ton and the size of a camel with a magnificent head of antlers. Mr. Ness shot at the animal, striking it over the shoulder. Wounded, but not killed, the animal circled the area where Mr. Ness had hidden, and finally moved on after a time. 1893 saw Granville Gray of Bangor, Maine, encounter the animal in the same general area of Lobster Lake. 1894 saw another shot fired by an unnamed New York hunter, again striking the animal but not killing it. The hunter hid in a cave and reported the animal to be 15 feet in height. In late 1899, Gilman Brown of West Newbury, Massachusetts was hunting near the Roach River, located in Piscataquis County of Maine, when he encountered the animal. Mr. Brown was so close to it, he counted 22 points on its antlers. Firing 5 times at the moose, the animal seemed unfazed and walked away. Mr. Brown swore that each shot made contact to the 10-foot-tall, 2,500-pound and 12-foot antlered monster. Shortly thereafter, George Nealon reported being treed by the beast along the road between Sherman and Moha, Maine. His encounter is as follows. As I had to go to Moha, I borrowed a bicycle and started at 4 p.m. over the woods road. I had gone only a little way when I came across 3 foxes. I gave a whoop, and they started on the run down the road, with me in hot pursuit. I covered the distance of 8 miles to Moha in quick time to the return trip. When I reached the place where I saw the foxes, I slowed down a bit. Coming to a long stretch of rising ground, I dismounted and walked. I had to go to the top and was just going to mount again, when I saw, as I thought, a horse in the road some distance ahead. I looked again and saw it was a monster moose. I waited a moment to see what he was going to do. Suddenly, he lowered his head and came straight for me. He roared like a bull, and the snorts which he made sounded like a locomotive exhausting steam. I dropped the bicycle and hustled for a tree. The first tree I came to was too small to climb, so I tried another, and a limb broke, and I landed on my back. The third one I succeeded in climbing. The moose had lost no time in getting to where I was, and I watched him closely. His antlers reached across the road in one place, and I should think that they had a spread of at least 11 feet. When he reached the bicycle, he stopped, nosed it, then trodden off into the woods. In 1917, New York hunter J.G. Sullivan reported seeing a white bull moose in the area near Mount Katahdin while hunting. The moose was described as standing a foot or so higher than an ordinary moose, with a tremendous spread and swoop of its antlers. Earlier, it was noted that Gilman Brown in 1899 swore he made contact with the moose with several of his bullets, yet they had little impact. This was not the first case from Maine of reported imperviousness of a moose. In February 1908, the Chicago Heights-Star ran an article entitled "That Ghost Moose" and outlined several instances from northern Maine of such phenomena, creating the Phantom Moose. All these events happened near the Molunkus River, the same generalized area discussed previously, and includes the following. A moose was shot and believed to have been killed by the members of a hunting group led by Sandy Hill. The moose was killed, but due to the time of day it could not be dressed, and was left hanging overnight after being cut to bleed out. The next day the hunters found the moose gone, and tracks showed it walking away. The next night, the hunters reported seeing the animal in their camp, with its throat slit. Sandy Hill fired at it, striking the target. The moose fell, and then stood up again and walked away. Tracks were reported showing its trek the following day. This same moose was reported again by Bert Peggins, near Ashland, Maine. Mr. Peggins felt the breath of the animal on his neck, and turning, stood nose to nose with a moose. The moose's throat was cut. Running inside, Mr. Peggins watched the animal through the window. The moose picked up his gun with its teeth, fired the weapon, and then vanished from sight. Arthur Hill also came upon a phantom moose near Mud Pond. The moose grabbed his gun after Mr. Hill missed his shot, and then vanished. Maine, however, is not the only place where the monster moose have been reported, even phantom-like, and unable to be killed by man. In Minnesota, there are stories of the devil moose, a moose that not only is large, but has been attributed with killing at least one black bear. The kill occurred in late 1904, when a Mr. Parker reported seeing a large moose near Little Fork, Minnesota, with the claw of a bear in its side. The bear was later found in a tree, dead of apparent blood loss from the severance of its arm.
I live in northern Minnesota, and I swear I saw this thing while deer hunting. I didn't see the whole thing, but it had a fucking dead wolf hanging off its antler. The one antler was like 4 feet long and had more than 10 points. I think it was probably 8 feet at the shoulder. My dad was gonna shoot, but my brother stopped him. He said it would be illegal to kill it, not only because it wasn't moose season, but because it would have to be tranked and studied. Also, shooting it would probably just piss it off.
In 1971, a mysterious woman captivated the citizens of Mobile. A creature dubbed the Wolf Woman of Mobile made her appearance to people along Davis Avenue and in the community of Plateau, according to reports in the Press Register at the time. Witnesses described the creature as having the lower body of a wolf and the head of a woman. She was seen at night, stalking residents, but never harming anyone. The wolf woman is one of several mythical creatures Alabamians have reported seeing over the years. The half-wolf, half-woman creature so frightened the citizenry of Mobile that people began calling the press register to report the sightings. On April 8, 1971, the newspaper reported the phenomenon, complete with a drawing of the creature conceived by a newspaper illustrator. Listening to as many as 50 phone calls the press register has received day and night in approximately a week, you wonder if perhaps there isn't something out there. Witnesses described the creature as pretty and hairy, and the top half was a woman and the bottom was a wolf. An unnamed teenager is quoted as saying, "My daddy saw it down in a marsh and it chased him home. Now, my mummy keeps all the doors and windows locked." One witness had heard the creature had escaped from a circus sideshow. The reporter said the fear of witnesses seemed real, although the initial reports would have begun on April Fool's Day. The police were getting calls too, and although officers would not make an official comment, they did investigate to determine what, exactly, Mobile's citizens were seeing.
Devil monkeys, USA. Quite aside from Bigfoot, there is another primate in American tradition said to be much like a large, carnivorous baboon. It has been reported at least since the 1930s, though there is some evidence for earlier sightings. The first reported encounter with this swift, dangerous predator occurred in 1934 in South Pittsburgh, Tennessee. According to the reports, which were allegedly published in national newspapers, eyewitnesses described a mysterious beast that could leap across fields with lightning speed. While these 1934 encounters may or may not be associated with this phenomenon, the first official devil monkey sighting occurred in 1959, while a couple by the name of Boyd were driving through the mountains near their home in Saltville, Virginia. According to their account, an ape-like beast attacked their car, leaving 3 scratch marks on the vehicle. The Boyd's daughter, Pauline, described the terrifying attacker. It had light, taffy-colored hair with a white blaze down its neck and underbelly. It stood on 2 large, well-muscled back legs and had shorter front legs or arms. Boyd went on to describe a second devil monkey encounter that occurred just days later in the same region. Several days after this incident, 2 nurses from the Saltville area were driving home from work one morning and were attacked by an unknown creature who ripped the convertible top from their car. Luckily, the nurses, though surely frightened out of their wits, were unharmed. In 1969, esteemed mystery ape researchers René Dahinden and John Green looked into accounts of a long-tailed monkey beast that eyewitnesses claimed was lurking near Mamquam, British Columbia. This creature was said to have left a series of distinctive 3-toed tracks, much like those attributed to the legendary Honey Island swamp monster, in its wake. In 1973, famed cryptozoologist and author Loren Coleman investigated reports of 3 black, bushy-tailed giant monkeys that were said to have slaughtered livestock in Albany, Kentucky. Coleman mentioned the event in an interview with Animal Planet. "I investigated that case in depth. I interviewed the people who were very sincere. In the whole context of devil monkey reports, it seemed extremely sincere. You have these reports of hairy, monkey-like creatures with tails, very different from Bigfoot." In 1979, there was a spate of reported encounters with a bipedal, monkey-like critter known as the Belt Road Booger, which hailed from the rural depths of Georgia. One female eyewitness described it as, "The ugliest-looking thing I've ever seen. It had a tail, like a beaver's, but it's bushy." She also claimed it bore a face like a dog. These traits are all known to be devil monkey characteristics. While the aforementioned case may reek of a hoax, some investigators feel that there is an intriguing link between these vicious New World primates and the still controversial De Ritter roadkill photos, pictured, which appeared on the internet in 1996 and seemed to depict the carcass of an unidentified baboon-like animal with canine features on a Louisiana roadside. It's worth mentioning that in 1996, Louisiana was also the site for another strange eyewitness report that seems very much like a devil monkey. The report was posted online by a biologist who works as a consultant for a biotechnology firm and understandably withheld his name in July of 2009. From his own account, "As I sat there alone, gazing out at the rain, I noticed some movement to my left in a large field next to the property. This field is separated from the property by an old fence with scattered pine trees next to it. I turned to look and saw something, I honestly don't know what, running extremely fast on all fours from the field towards our property. At first, I guess I kinda thought it may be a dog, but as it got closer, I realized I was wrong. The thing, whatever it was, ran on all fours to a spot in the fence where the trees were about 30 feet apart and leapt over the 5-foot fence in one hop. Once on my side of the fence, this thing stood up on 2 legs. It was only 30 feet from me at that point, and I got a really good look at it. It was about 4 feet tall, maybe a little bigger. It had really big yellowish eyes, large pointed ears, and a sparse coat of shaggy fur. It stood on its tiptoes and had a long, somewhat bushy tail, kind of like a squirrel, but not nearly as thickly furred.
1879. Sea animal seen killing devouring whale. The accompanying engravings are facsimiles of a sketch sent to us by Captain Davidson of the steamship Kyusha Umaru, and is inserted as a specimen of the curious drawings which are frequently forwarded to us for insertion. Captain Davidson's statement, which is countersigned by his chief officer, Mr. McKechnie, is as follows. Saturday, April 5th at 11:15 a.m., Cape Satano distant about 9 miles, the chief officer and myself observed a whale jump clear out of the sea, about a quarter of a mile away. Shortly after it leapt out again, when I saw there was something attached to it, got glasses, and on the next leap distinctly saw something holding on to the belly of the whale. The latter gave one more spring clear of the water, and myself and chief officer then observed what appeared to be a creature of the snake species rear itself, about 30 feet out of the water. It appeared to be about the thickness of a junk's mast, and after standing about 10 seconds in an erect position, it descended into the water, the upper end going first. With my glasses, I made out the color of the beast to resemble that of a pilot fish.
The Owlman was seen during the years 1976 to 1978 in the county of Cornwall. More specifically, it was seen in the vicinity of the Mournen village. Some of the sightings were reported to the well-known cryptozoologist Tony Doc Shields, who reportedly coined the name Owlman. The first sighting took place on April 17, 1976, and was reported by 2 girls, June and Vicky Melling. They reportedly saw a large, feathered birdman hovering over the Mournen church on Morgowers Mile. The sighting left the 2 girls so frightened that the family cut short its holiday. Similar sightings were reported over the next 2 years, and a picture of the Owlman emerged, a partially feathered man-sized owl with pointed ears and clawed feet. It was a silvery grey colour with slanting red eyes. Some people have seen similarities between the Owlman and the better-known Mothman. There were several sightings of the Owlman between 1976 and 1978, all in the vicinity of Mournen Church, after which it seems to have disappeared. There have been 1 or 2 reports since then, but not many. What makes the Cornish Owlman story so interesting is that it didn't take place in isolation. The sightings happened at a time when many weird things were going on in the area. During the spring of 1976, the weather in Cornwall went through extreme shifts between unusual heat waves and cold snaps. Animals behaved strangely. There are reports of packs of dogs, cats, and birds terrorizing people. In addition, there was an upsurge in UFO reports. In one well-known incident, a school teacher and several pupils watched a white spinning disc with pulsating lights pass overhead on 09 July 1976. Furthermore, the church is located on a ley line, often associated with anomalous phenomena.
Moha Moha. Reportedly, this inhabitant of Queensland's Great Barrier Reef resembles a giant long-necked turtle with the tail of a fish. Miss S. Lovell, a schoolmarm from Sandy Cape on Great Sandy Island, reported the following in 1890. We have had a visit from a monster turtle fish. I send a sketch of it. It let me stand for half an hour within 5 feet of it. When tired of my looking at it, it put its large neck and head into the water and swept round seaward, raising its dome-shaped body about 5 feet out of the water, and put its 12 feet of fish-like tail over the dry shore, elevating it at an angle. Then, giving its tail a half twist, it shot off like a flash of lightning, and I saw its tail in the air about 1/4 of a mile off where the steamer's anchor. The jaws are about 18 inches in length, the head and neck greenish-white, with large white spots on the neck, and a band of white round a very black eye. The body was dome-shaped, about 8 feet across and 5 feet high, smooth and slate gray in color. Tail about 2 feet, the fish part wedge-shaped, and fin of chocolate brown. Then beautiful silver shading to scales size of a thumbnail. Her correspondence, forwarded to Land and Water, went on to indicate the scales were perpendicular to the axis of its body, and related a tale of how it had reportedly attacked an Aborigine camp 8 years earlier. The editors of Land and Water suggested it might have been a fly river turtle, which has a long neck. They made no attempt to account for size. The fly river turtle does not exceed 3 feet in length. Various suggestions have been made for the tail, that a shark or other fish was biting the large turtles behind, for example. Lovell's letters steadfastly maintained that it was a monster, half fish, half tortoise. For some reason, this story is almost always written off as a hoax, despite Lovell also accurately describing a womang, manta, years before that creature was known to science.
Since OP seems to have died, let's go with general cryptids. While there have been scores of photos purporting to have captured the likeness of an extraterrestrial being, such as Alabama's metal Man of Falkville, few are as intriguing as the image accidentally snapped by firefighter Jim Templeton. The incident occurred near the Solway Firth estuary, when Templeton and his family hiked up a grassy knoll 8 miles west of their home in Carlisle on a sunny Saturday afternoon. Templeton was an amateur photographer and wanted to take some photos of their daughter Elizabeth in her new dress with his Kodak SLR. He claimed that it was normal afternoon except for the fact that the cow and sheep that would normally have infested the field were all bunched together feeding on the far side of the marsh. All the animals on that particular day were away on the other end of the marsh, all huddled together as though they'd been frightened. Templeton, noticing nothing awry, had Elizabeth pose on a grassy hillside grasping a bunch of freshly picked flowers. He proceeded to snap 3 successive photos of his child, and then the family continued on their way, unaware of what the camera had captured. A few days later, Templeton retrieved his photographs back from the chemist that had developed them. In passing, the chemist expressed his disappointment that some idiot had ruined what he believed to be the best shot of his daughter. Templeton, puzzled, looked at the photograph in question. What he saw was the image of what appeared to be a tall, humanoid figure clad in a spacesuit, jutting out at an odd angle from behind his daughter's head. Templeton was confounded as neither he nor his wife had seen anything or anyone unusual on their walk. But what was most perplexing was the fact that the spaceman only showed up in the middle of the 3 consecutive photos he had shot and was missing from the first and last. Templeton, hoping to get to the bottom of this mystery, reported the case to the police and sent the picture back to Kodak, where it was exhaustively examined by trained professionals for any signs of faulty film stock, tampering, or hoax. They found none.
Radio signal from Mars in 1924. In 1924, Mars was due to approach its closest opposition to the Earth. Mr. David Todd, a prominent British astronomer, conceived the notion of using a brand new invention to scan the red planet for traces of life. This was the Jenkins radio camera, a revolution in technology, which converted radio signals into visual images and was used for sending press photographs. Todd's imaginative project captured news headlines, and whole governments devoted their broadcasting systems to monitoring the experiment. The project required total silence from radio transmitters on Earth, something that would be impossible today. But in 1924, there were few commercial stations, and radar had not been invented. It is easy to imagine the tension as radio operators waited in total radio silence for signals. And then, suddenly, even ham operators began to register signals. This was almost incredible, for early amateur receivers would generally pick up only exceptionally strong signals originating close at hand. The New York Times of the 28th of August 1924 reported an examination of the developed film from Jenkins' radio camera, a fairly regular arrangement of dots and dashes along. One side, at almost evenly spaced intervals, are curiously jumbled groups, each taking the form of a crudely drawn face.
Inflatable hedgehog. Reported from the Gobi Desert of Mongolia, this animal is called the Zamba Zaraa by locals. It is described as looking something like a hedgehog. When threatened, the animal strikes its tail against the ground, an alarm action that is used by many different types of animal, and then proceeds to inflate itself considerably. Reports differ on how big it is after inflation, and range up to the size of a yurt, a small Mongolian tent-like dwelling. There are other creatures who inflate themselves as a defense mechanism, most notably pufferfish. It would be weird, but not impossible, for a mammal to have evolved the same trick. Since the Gobi Desert is one of the least explored areas on Earth, it is plausible that it contains many new species that are just waiting to be discovered. Perhaps the inflatable hedgehog is one of these undiscovered animals, and someday we will be able to see it in zoos.
Wonderful thread, OP, and contributors. I don't have a cryptid to contribute, but I do have a phenomenal animal to contribute. Not paranormal, but certainly odd and interesting. This is Pelorus Jack, a Risso's dolphin that was famous for meeting and guiding ships through a perilous channel near New Zealand from between 1888 and 1912. Often, if a ship's crew did not see him at first, they would wait for him to appear before attempting to cross. He was shot at in an incident in 1904, prompting a law to be written for his protection. He continued to help guide ships, but no longer helped the ship from which he was shot at from. During his tenure, there were no shipwrecks. It is believed he died from old age.
Untouchable. Bathysphere Fish. On the 22nd of November 1932, Bermuda-based zoologist Dr. William Beebe was 2,100 feet beneath the surface of the sea in a bathysphere, sighted 5 miles southeast of Bermuda's Nonsuch Island. While he was observing the denizens of the deep passing by the bathysphere's windows, two very unusual fishes became illuminated in the craft's electric beam of light as they twice swam past it, no more than 8 feet away. Their long, slender bodies, each of which was at least 6 feet long with strongly undershot jaws housing numerous teeth, reminded Beebe of barracudas, but running along either side of each fish was a single, laterally sighted horizontal row of luminous organs, photophores, little short of 20 in total, and everyone emitting a powerful pale blue light. Equally striking were the two twitching, tentacle-like structures that hung down beneath each fish, one arising from its lower jaw, the other from the beginning of its short anal fin. Once again, each of these structures emitted light by virtue of a pair of organs at its tip. The organ attached directly to the tentacle shone red, the other one, attached to the red organ, shone blue. Also noteworthy was their vertical dorsal fin, positioned well back towards the tail end of the body. Beebe was unable to discern any pectoral fins or pelvic fins. From these fishes' general morphology, Beebe concluded that their species was most probably allied to the melanostomiatids, popularly known as the scaleless black dragon fishes. However, its single line of lateral photophores, not to mention its pair of ventral tentacles with light-emitting terminal organs, unequivocally distinguished it from any known species within that family. As a result, Beebe christened his mystifying discovery Bathysphere intacta, untouchable bathysphere fish, sole member of a new genus. Beebe's account remains the only description of these animals and is unlikely to be a hoax. Beebe's written work was laboriously detailed. The book in which this report occurs, Half Mile Down, is still considered an invaluable and accurate guide to abyssal exploration.
I hope that you enjoyed tonight's broadcast. If you enjoyed tonight's story, then please subscribe to the channel as more Greentext will appear daily. A new broadcast will appear when the clock strikes midnight Central Time.
Remember to check the Odyssey and Rumble pages for separate archives of previous broadcasts.